Hello and welcome to AgriFocus, the podcast from Agriland that looks in depth at some of the topical issues of the day. I'm Stella Meehan and I'm joined today by Deputy Chief Veterinary Officer at the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Eoin Ryan, to discuss Bluetongue. Now, last Saturday, Agriculture Minister Martin Hayden confirmed that a case of Bluetongue had been detected in a herd on a farm in County Wexford, the first case reported in the Republic of Ireland. It had been a concern for months that the virus would reach our shores, and vigilance was really advised when the virus was detected in Northern Ireland late last year. But let's take it right back to the start with the basics first, Professor Ryan. Can you describe to us what Bluetongue is?
Thanks, Stella. Yeah, Bluetongue is a viral disease that affects cattle, sheep, goats, and camelids. That's alpacas and llamas and other animals like that. It's a virus that causes them to become quite sick. They can get a range of clinical signs ranging from a swollen tongue, hence blue tongue. It gets this kind of reddish appearance. They can have trouble breathing. They can become lame. Pregnant animals can abort. They can become very unwell. It's a range of conditions, and they can get these sort of crusty, erosive lesions around their mouth, around their gums and their lips. And so the virus can cause a lot of damage. It generally doesn't kill that many animals, but it can make quite a lot of animals quite sick. And the virus is transmitted mainly by biting midges. So how that happens is an animal may be infected. If a midge bites that animal, the midge itself then becomes infected. And a period of time later, when it's completed its cycle, if that midge then goes on to bite other cattle, other sheep, it passes on the infection that way. So that's an important difference between a disease like Bluetongue versus, for instance, foot and mouth disease or other diseases like that. It's not directly transmittable from animal to animal directly. It's insect borne. Now, it can also be spread through germinal products, that is, infected semen or infected embryos. So, for instance, if a bull became infected and it then made its cows, they could become infected. And if pregnant animals are infected, it can pass on to the lamb or the calf. And that's another way. But the principal way that it spreads is by these biting midges. Now, Bluetongue years ago used to be confined to the Mediterranean basin, warmer places, warmer weather. It wasn't really anything that we concerned ourselves about in Ireland. But with climate change in the last 10 or 15 years or so, Bluetongue has been spreading northwards through Europe from southern Italy, southern Spain, southern France, right up through Europe, moving steadily onwards. And in recent years, it spread right across Europe until in the last few weeks, only Ireland was free of Bluetongue in Western and Northern Europe. And unfortunately now we've detected cases in Wexford and we've lost our freedom. So it's a serious disease. It's a virus. It's spread by biting insects. But an important point, it isn't in the same category as foot and mouth disease or something like that, that it's not directly transmissible between animals.
And you mentioned some of the clinical signs there, but as I understand the case in Wexford, there were no clinical signs at the time. So an animal can still have it and not display any symptoms.
Yes, exactly. And there's been a range of things observed and reported in other countries about that, from animals that become very, very sick, and sheep tend to be more severely affected than cattle, but right up to animals that may be infected and not show clinical signs. And that can be a challenge as well. So exactly the cases we had in Wexford, no reports of those of sickness on that herd of origin. And of course, it's preferable if the animals don't get sick. But because you have such variety, it means that you can fail to see infection if you're not doing surveillance for it. There are many different types of Bluetongue. There's actually about 30 different strains of the virus. And Bluetongue 3 is the type that we've detected in Wexford. And that was the main strain of concern spreading across Europe for the last couple of years. It caused quite a lot of losses and sickness and deaths, particularly in sheep in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in countries like that. They really remarked on it. And in dairy cattle, it can cause a marked milk drop. So dairy farmers would notice a huge drop off in milk. And this is, of course, a huge impact on them, not to mention abortions, dummy calves, dummy lambs. And it's not just about animals dying, it's about that toll of seeing animals sick every day. It spread to Great Britain, principally England and Wales, last year and the year before. And there were fewer reports of serious illness in animals there. So I suppose one of the things that we're wondering is, what if you get Bluetongue, it does not necessarily mean on your herd or your flock that you'll see severe clinical signs. In some places that has been seen, in others it's been much milder. An important point, though, that I want to highlight is Bluetongue doesn't infect people. It's not a food safety risk. There's no threat to food safety at all. And I suppose for all of us in the agricultural community, it's really important to keep reiterating that point so that people don't misunderstand that this is a threat to people. You can't get Bluetongue yourself. There's no issue with meat or milk from animals. And that's something that we're continually trying to repeat that messaging to reassure consumers here and abroad.
And returning to that particular case then in Wexford, how was it detected? Obviously, there were no clinical signs. So how did that detection come about? And once that has been established that there is a case there, what are the next steps that happen once a case is either reported or detected?
Yeah, thanks, Sally. Well, how it was detected was through an active surveillance program we have. So obviously, we've been acutely conscious for the last 2 years that Bluetongue serotype 3 has been spreading right throughout Europe, and we were very conscious we were at risk of it. And we have been carrying out very intensive surveillance a number of different ways through the last couple of years. But since those cases were reported in Northern Ireland in December, we have really ramped it up. So there's a number of things we're doing. First of all, animals or calves or lambs that go to the regional veterinary laboratories. The department is a network of regional veterinary laboratories. They're tested for Bluetongue virus. Any animals reported that could have anything that could possibly be Bluetongue. So, for instance, dairy herds of milk drop, we're testing those for Bluetongue. We're actively going out to herds along the east coast and the southeast coast because those are the areas most likely to have infected midges blown across the Irish Sea from northern France or from England and Wales. We're testing a selection of cattle in those areas, and then also when cull cows go for slaughter to the factory, just normal healthy animals, we're taking blood from a selection of those animals from right across the country and testing them. And it was this third mechanism that actually detected antibodies to Bluetongue in this from a herd in Wexford. So our intensified surveillance, it's not the result anybody wanted, but actually the system worked because what we had wanted was a system where we would detect it as early as reasonable after an incursion. And in this case, we did detect it. So although, of course, a very unwelcome result, not a surprising result, actually the intensified surveillance put in place did work in this case and enabled us to identify it. So that's how we found the case.
And in terms of the time of year, Professor, is it a strange time of year to detect
Well,
it?
we're in the low risk period for Bluetongue at the moment. Um, One of the things that is complex about Bluetongue is that I mentioned earlier that the virus replicates in midges. That's how it's spread, but it can only replicate in midges when the temperature is consistently above 12 degrees. Now, the warmer it is, the quicker it can replicate. So if it's very hot in July or August, it might take 4 or 5 days for that cycle. If it's a lot cooler, just say 15 or 16 degrees around, say, May or September, that could take 2 or even 3 weeks. At the moment, even though people might say, and I've seen them myself, there's still midges around, you still see a few midges around, it's still too cold. Even if those midges bit an animal infected, the virus cannot replicate because it's just too cold for it to happen at the moment. What our surveillance program detected was animals that would have been infected probably the very end of autumn, probably the last days in which it was warm enough for the virus to replicate midges, whether they were infected midges blown across from you probably England or Wales, a little bit less likely France, but it could have been, I think, most likely England and Wales. Maybe they bit those animals at the back end of autumn, and the animals then developed antibodies to the virus, and that was what was picked up on the test. So we've detected an incursion which probably happened a couple of months ago, maybe even 3 months ago. We can't put a time in it right now. The reason that I don't think it was something that happened, say, during the peak of summer, is because we would have picked it up sooner and we would have probably seen spread. Now, the meaning of that, the implication of it being detected now is um, because the virus cannot spread through midges right now, it's too cold. That actually means there isn't a requirement to put in place the sort of stringent movement controls that would have been required if this was July or August. If it was July or August or September, we'd be saying, look, we have to stop this disease spreading. If animals move from an infected area to a non-infected area, they could be bitten by midges and it can set up another infection. And that's why in other countries they've put in place movement controls. And that's what we had planned to do. And we've contingency plans to put that in place. But actually, because it's the depths of January, that's not necessary right now. It's not proportionate and it wouldn't give us any advantage. And of course, one wouldn't want to put in place controls, strict movement controls, which have an effect on industry and make life a lot more difficult unless there's going to be a benefit to farmers, to cattle and sheep to offset that. So that's why Right now, it has not been necessary to put in place movement controls in the area around this herd, because we wouldn't be stopping the spread of any infection. And that's also why it hasn't been necessary to sort of take the sort of very strict enforcement that would have been required to protect other parts of the country if this was the summer. So in some ways, detecting this in winter, it's, we know now where it is. We've found it before the summer, and but that's why, unlike other diseases where you can say, here's what we'll do if there's a case of bluetongue, or a case of bird flu rather, or here's what we'll do if there's a case of foot and mouth disease. With bluetongue, it very much depends on the time of year and the circumstances. And right now, it's those sort of controls aren't required.
Yeah, it's appearing, I suppose, that it's not wildly rampant in the livestock community, particularly in the southeast at the moment. But are there there are some impacts, and maybe if you just want to outline if there's impact for exports at the moment, or is it dependent on sort of market? And then the second thing is, obviously, you mentioned there it depends on the time of year and the circumstances. So, one would assume a cull is not needed in this particular case in Wexford.
Yeah, that's correct. So right now, it's not necessary proportionate to cull infected animals, because you wouldn't be preventing onward spread. These animals will if they they'll get over the virus. Now that in this case, we didn't get reports that they were sick, but say there was another herd detected where animals were sick, they can recover from the virus, and we would anticipate that the virus would be gone before the high risk period in the summer. So right now, in the current situation, we don't think it's required to cull. And of course, all this depends on the circumstances. So it would take each case in its merits. There are still significant impacts from this. So first of all, as you said, there's the impact on we've lost our official bluetongue freedom. We were the last country in Northern or Western Europe to have bluetongue freedom. With the cases in Northern Ireland in December, the Isle of Man reported cases last week, so it wasn't a surprise that it was coming, but it's gone now. Um, the I suppose for the export of animals, calves or cattle within the European Union, so moving cattle to another EU member state, that can still take place, but there will be additional complications to do that. So each country is setting its own conditions. Some countries haven't set any conditions for bluetongue. So if you're moving calves to those countries, for France, for instance, or the Netherlands, there's no additional requirements because of this. For other countries, they may require a test, and that can be done, but of course, it costs a bit of money and takes time. Or they may require the animals to be vaccinated, or they may require some sort of quarantine period. And that will all add an expense and logistical complications to moving those calves. So for some countries, there'll be no additional requirements. For others, there will be. Now, there's the European Union, the European Commission website has a list of all those conditions. And one of the things, we had a big meeting with stakeholders on Monday morning, setting out in detail what these conditions are, and we'll be following up on that, so that if people do want to export calves or adult cattle or sheep or lambs or whatever, they'll be able to get clear guidance on what is required based on the country they're exporting to. For movements to third countries, that's a little bit more complicated, because some of those third countries do require bluetongue freedom. Now, that was fine for us for the last while.
Those are countries, of course, outside the EU. Yeah.
Correct. Countries outside the EU. So we're actively engaging with those countries outside the EU to try to engage on that and say, look, let's engage on that at the moment. So it does cause additional difficulties. I would say, depending on, and it depends on the country within the European Union, and that in itself, that complexity is a challenge, I suppose, for farmers, for exporters, because it's not just as simple as in all circumstances you must do X, or in all circumstances you must do Y. An important point is that the department has spent a lot of time in the last year and a half engaging with third countries to remove references to bluetongue from our certificates, so to revise them. Now, we're always engaging with our these countries anyway, but so that's because we knew we were at risk of bluetongue, so that if we did have a case, it wouldn't have as big of an impact on our exports, and that was very successful. So, for instance, our dairy exports to countries outside the EU, they're not affected, other than the moves to the certificate to Canada, and we're engaging with the Canadians on that. Similarly, our beef and sheep meat exports, all of our main destination markets, we've successful engaged on that. There's a few markets in other parts of the world where we've ongoing discussions, but it's far less of an impact than it would have been a year and a half ago. But there's no doubt this is unwelcome news, and it will add complications for those involved in exporting cattle and sheep.
Oh, yeah. And I was going to ask there actually when you were just saying about the different conditions about China, because I know that they had been particular about it. And in fairness, we had just got back into China. So people were, optimistic. But will that hinder things a little for the moment?
No, we're required to inform the Chinese under our agreement with them if we have a case of Bluetongue, and we have done that. And that's that notification has been sent. So look, I think we continue to engage there.
And just finally, can I ask you about vaccines? I mean, we've talked about them in the past when we were discussing Bluetongue being a possibility. Are they a solution, Professor Ryan?
Yeah, they are. Look, vaccines are a very useful tool. Vaccination for Bluetongue 3 has been authorised in Ireland since just before Christmas there. There's 3 authorised vaccines in the EU for Bluetongue 3. They're widely in use across Europe and in the UK, and they are available in Ireland. They don't prevent infection in all cases, but they do prevent animals becoming sick, or they reduce the amount of sickness, and they can really, be useful in that way. And I think what we do is we encourage farmers to have a conversation with their vet about whether vaccination is the right choice for them, because of course these vaccines aren't free; you have to buy them, and it depends on the business. Some people may feel, look, I'm really concerned about this. I really don't want my sheep or my cattle becoming ill. Maybe I have, you know, pedigree sheepdog or maybe high yielding dairy cattle. I really could not deal with a Bluetongue outbreak. In that case, it may be worth vaccinating. Others may have a different business model and may say, look, I have to look at the costs. And we'd encourage farmers to have a conversation with their vet about that. The important point to emphasize is that there's no need to rush to vaccinate now. The time that you would want to have a vaccine delivered, if you were going to vaccinate, is by the high risk summer period. So that's starting around kind of May-ish is when we would expect virus to start to spread if it's still here then. So there's several months actually during which people can have that conversation, discuss with their vet. Their vet can apply for a license to get this vaccine, and there are stocks of vaccine already in the country. We have that confirmation from one of the suppliers, so we don't anticipate any supply issues there. And people do have time to have a think about this. We don't need a rush to vaccinate. You want the vaccine delivered by, if you're interested in vaccinating, we want that done by kind of the start of summer. So there's a little bit of time there. But vaccine, useful tool, but people would want to consider, is it worth the cost for them? In some cases, the answer will be yes. In other cases, they may not be quite so sure.
And then finally, the test results that are due today, I think, or even tomorrow, will they tell us anything more, or is that more or less a confirmation of the case detected?
They will, yeah. We've been carrying out additional investigations in that area, and those results are due, over the coming days. So, in one way, we have Bluetongue 3 in the country now. That's confirmed. That's not going to change. But what will be useful to know is the degree to which we may have it in that area of Wexford. Have there been a number of herds or flocks infected, or is it just this one incursion? Is it widespread? Is it limited? And I think that will all help to give us additional information. So I think those results will be useful. They'll give us a bigger picture, but we're not going back to Bluetongue freedom anytime soon. Like, we have it now, and the results won't change that, but they will give us a better understanding of the situation on the ground and how far it may have spread locally.
And very important for farmers to talk to their local vet there in the coming months as we approach the summer season. Well, that's all we have time for on this episode of AgriFocus. Thanks to our guest today, Deputy Chief Veterinary Officer at DAFM, Professor Eoin Ryan. Thank you very much for joining us. If you found this episode useful, please rate and review it on the podcast platforms, or share it with someone you know who might be interested. Until next time, goodbye and take care.